So everything we see, you watch a movie, you watch a series, you read a book, if you ever see Jesus, he doesn't look anything like me. The guy has porcelain white skin, long blonde hair, he's got blue eyes. This whole Jesus, this whole Christianity thing, is it ours? Is it African? We're talking about that today, always on Conversations about Church and Culture. So, Christianity, is this thing African? Can we connect with it? So today I'm having a conversation with Always On. I've been looking forward to this for a long, we've talked about this for a long time. And it's good to be back and good to be doing this conversation. I have a good friend of mine, Kyama Mugambi, doctor, pastor at large. He's a pastor at Mavuno Church, family man. He's been a good friend of mine and my family's as well. He's an academic, he's a lecturer, he's a theologian, and he also serves as the editorial manager of the African Theological Network Press, where they publish books by Africans for Africa. Dr. Kyama, I don't know, that name just sticks. Dr. Kyama.
Thank you.
It's so good to see you.
Yeah, so good to do this.
Yeah, I know. We've talked about this for a long time. Haven't had the opportunity to do it. I know you speak about this more than most people that I know about. I mean, I've listened to you, I've read material you've written about this topic. Huyu Jesus. Ni wetu kweli. I mean, I'm just like, does he, when I go to a hospital and I see a statue of Jesus, it's not me, Bana. It's not like this.
No, he's or if you go to someone's house and they have a picture, for the home.
The unseen guest, these things. So I'm just like, this Jesus, is he for Africans?
Yeah, I think he is. And I think it's good to know where that picture came from. And that might explain a little bit of why, he's the way he is, or So I believe, Jesus says, that he came for all humankind, for God so loved the world, that he gave his only begotten son. So Jesus is for the world, really. He came for the world. But here's what's happened. When Jesus entered Europe, the people connected with him so much that their portrayals of him are, like themselves. And so, the blonde, the blue-eyed, and, slim with a certain kind of hair.
He doesn't have that African, that wide African nose.
He doesn't have the wide African nose. But here's the thing. He was nothing like that. He was Middle Eastern. He probably would look more like an Egyptian. The hair doesn't flow quite like that. It's probably a little, like Arabic or Egyptian kind of hair. His skin will be darker. In fact, today he'll be called a man of color.
Are you kidding me?
If he was there today.
Wait. It's interesting because of this whole Black Lives Matter movement and whatnot. You're saying Jesus would be on our side of the fence.
I mean, he'd be a man of color. I mean, he would not be, white. He'd be brown. He'd have a dark tan on his skin. And he wouldn't, the things that we associate with Europe today, or the West, the global West, those are not the things that he would be associated with at the time. And here's another interesting thing. Many centuries later, an author, Philip Jenkins says, and several scholars have actually said that if you're looking for a typical Christian, the typical holder of this faith that we call Christianity, they say, they actually, I had a lecturer, one of my mentors say this. He said that the typical Christian would be, a black Nigerian woman living in the rural area. Why is that? Because there are more Christians in Africa than there are in Europe. By 100 million Christians.
First you said something that I really like. And I never thought about this. What you're saying is, when Christianity entered Europe, they made a picture of Jesus that connected with them.
Correct.
In fact, I read an article that talked about how, when Hollywood was creating, the Jesus film and those movies, they had to sell it within, their space.
Yeah.
And the only way to do that was to make someone who looked like them.
Yeah.
So here we are, decades and decades later.
Yeah.
And we're like, Jesus is white.
Yeah.
But you're telling me he's a guy for Black Lives Matter.
By the way, he most likely would identify, in terms of race, in terms of some of the thoughts. Maybe not all, but some of the thoughts.
Let me ask, people, that's a really good thought and I like it.
Yeah.
But I think for me, culturally, what's at the heart of this conversation is a very dirty word called colonialism.
Yeah.
Because when we think about us guys as Miros, as Africans, this thing came with the colonialists. And, the narrative I hear, the perception that we have is that this thing was brought to enslave us. It was brought to enslave our minds. It was brought to make us docile, towards... Is that what's your response when you hear something like that?
So there's several responses. The first one is, let's name it for what it is. Colonialism was bad.
It was terrible.
It was terrible. And they are on so many different levels. It was terrible. Let's also be honest and say that the colonial governments would use anything that they could find to be able to, to extract. Basically, it was extraction. They were coming in to
I really want to see where you're going with this.
So that's, let's get that out of the way. But then let's get some facts in. Number one, the colonial governments came in on average 50 years after the missionaries had already come.
Ooh, that's what I've never heard of. Sorry. So what you're saying is, hey, this is interesting. Missionaries had landed on our shores. Many years before the colonialists. Explain. 10 marks.
Take Kenya. Take Kenya, for example. And it's true of many parts of Africa, south of the Sahara. We all know Ludwig Kraft. First missionary, CMS missionary, German guy. Passionate for the gospel. He comes in 1844
to Kenya.
Into mainland Kenya. Into Kenya. This part of the world he came in earlier. That's something else that the history books don't tell us. He actually came first into Ethiopia.
Okay, so middle of the 19th century.
1844 he comes in, and he works and he writes. He even leaves, and then other people come. Redman stays a little longer, and other missionaries come in. But that is a full 40 years before the partition of Africa.
Okay.
Before colonialism has been has been institutionalized, and then after 1885, that's the 1885 Berlin Conference, all of that.
The scramble for Africa.
Scramble for Africa. After 1885, it takes another 10 years before the Imperial British East Africa Company really sort of settles itself nicely and begins to build the railway. The colonial government, what is called a formal colonial government, on the soil of Kenya started in 1920. That's like 80 years.
You guys, did you know that? Me, I didn't know that. I'm just being honest. You're saying that the colonialists were here decades and decades. Sorry, the missionaries before the colonialists got.
And this is the way the colonialists knew, the imperialists or whatever you want to call them, the way they knew about Africa, the way they knew the landscape, they knew the people, they knew the resources and everything, was from the missionaries. They read their diaries, they read their books. And when they read those books and they read those diaries, that's the time they figured, we can go and get into this thing. Now, is that to say that there was no, connection between missionaries? Yes, some missionaries did
between missionaries and colonialists.
There were. It was a what is it called? It was a strained relationship. It was a situationship. It was a love-hate relationship. Because the missionaries cared for the Africans and for the gospel. But then the missionaries also needed infrastructure. And the imperial governments would bring infrastructure. So it was a very stressed relationship because, the imperialists really didn't care for the gospel or anything like that. And so because of that, there was always, friction between the two. And sometimes, the missionaries would, really, really go all the way the other side. So, for example, in Kenya, when the colonial government actually started in the 1920s, one of the interesting things is that, Indians had representation, Africans did not have representation. Guess what the colonial government did? They said, well, let's get those missionaries, because after all, they care so much about the Africans. Those are the ones that are going to come and represent the Africans. And when they came in, again, it was a strained relationship. In fact, it was the missionaries that would help the Africans to form, constitutions for like the labor organizations or the land organization. So? Yes. It's the missionaries that taught them the language, helped them draft the things, and then, help them go to court so that they could try and plead a case on the,
you know why this, for me, is surprising to hear?
Yeah.
Is because the narrative is that they came on the same boat.
Yeah.
And that the colonialists came with the missionaries with the intention that we are going to use you guys to subjugate those Africans. But what you're saying is that these guys, one, came before. They had a culture of care for the Africans.
Yeah.
That even when the colonialists landed and we talked about representations, they are the ones who are representing, who are helping the Africans.
Yeah. As best as they knew how to. Now, we need to remember, by the way, they didn't know how to relate with other cultures. So some of them still had, some negative views of Africans and so on. But they had a passion for the gospel. And they had a passion for these natives or these pagans or these, whatever, barbarians, to get to know Christ. And so they're not all perfect. But I think we plaster more on them than we really should.
But let me ask you this question. Is there anything you would change in how Christianity was brought to Africa?
Oh, yeah.
And how it was represented to Africa?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Tell me about that.
A lot. I think, let me, okay, a number of things. Number one, I think the attitude was very patronizing. And so there are many missionaries who would come in feeling that we have all the solutions, we have all the answers, and they'd come in.
So there's a superiority about it.
Yeah, there's a certain superiority about it. Number two, there needed to be a little bit more listening to the culture, to the local culture. And a third thing that's very much related with that, I think they needed to listen to themselves first. So, for example, things like dressing, clothing. When you became a Christian, they would want to put clothes on you, like the way they would dress. A lot of those clothes are very...
Which is a culture the church has stayed with for a long time in this part of the world, where you become a Christian, you have to...
Yeah, you put in this, you take on the names, and so on. And it was meant... Names. Yeah, it was meant, it was meant well. But the truth of the matter is that, there was a lot that was left to be desired on that. I mean, the clothes, for example, that's a practical concern. It's hot here on the continent. Many places, much of the continent is very hot. It doesn't make sense to wear some of those clothes. So, so that's one of the things that, those are three things that needed to have been changed. Today, we know a lot more. We've developed disciplines, anthropology of listening. In fact, some of those disciplines really grew with the missionary work, because people would write and study people, ethnography, study the people. How do they do this thing? How do they behave? How do they? I mean, there's a book that was written in 1933, I think it is, 1933-34, about the Kikuyu. It was written by a Catholic father. And one needs to know that that's just 30 years after. And he wrote this with really, serious anthropological work on the Kikuyu. And the story is repeated in many parts of Africa. But to answer your question, there are many things that could have been done different, that should have been done different. In fact, there are many things that we need to learn from, because now Africans are going back into Europe, and sometimes we're making the same mistakes that the missionaries made by carrying our culture and expecting that other people are going to connect with it in the same way.
Yanni, my mind is blown. I want to ask you in just a moment about I've heard you talk in the past about the church in Africa, we started with colonialists, but you talked about the church in Africa predating colonialism, and that the church in Africa was actually established even prior to that 1844 season that you're talking about. I want to get to that in just a moment. Guys, you're watching Always On. It's our conversations on church and culture. I hope you're enjoying the conversation. We'll be right back.